Good afternoon, scholars. Welcome to your Tuesday Vista Virtual class. Um, Today's class is going to look an awful lot like yesterday's class because most of us are going to be redoing or improving our mid-unit performance tasks from yesterday. So I want to speak real quick to the importance of this work and also what's going to happen if you don't do it. So during Vista Virtual, while you guys are at home and our classes are online, the grades that you're getting are pretty generous because we're not in person together, so you can't get as much support as you would. However, this work is still really important, and it's also not impossible at all. It's seventh grade work that that all of us can do, especially if we give our best effort and go to office hours. Um, just so you know, scholars, students that are not doing this work right now, they're not just getting a free pass. If you're not doing all of your assignments during this time, we're keeping track of everybody and what everyone's doing and what they're not doing. And that's not just turning it in, but actually doing your best on it. So any scholars who are not doing the key assignments and the assignments in general, when we get back to school in the fall, you're going to have extra homework doing these assignments. And you also may be missing team time and club time quite often until you get this work done. So for those of you who are knocking this out at home, just off the top of my head, from this assignment, Jacqueline, you did a killer job giving your best effort and also embedding evidence really well. We're going to look at Amani's work. We're not going to look at Catherine's work because it's very long and it's also hard to see with all the comments that Miss McKinney's made, but her work was killer. And we're also going to look at Serenity's work. Those aren't the only scholars doing good work. It's not just 4 people, but those are the ones who jump out to my mind so far. And there's also a lot of scholars who thought that they could respond to a test grade, to a full-on essay prompt with 1 paragraph or even 1 sentence. That's not acceptable. That's definitely not acceptable here in Vista College Prep, and it's really not acceptable anywhere that's worthwhile, whether it's the good high school program that's getting ready for college, and definitely not college itself. So we're going to put a pause on reading any more pages in the book, and we're going to, if you get your essay returned to you, if you did not get a 3 out of 4 or a 4 out of 4, you're going to get your essay returned to you with lots of comments from Miss McKinney. But I'm also going to take some time right now to really walk through an exemplar essay from Serenity. And I've also added some steps on your planning document that asks you questions to make sure you're answering them, just in case you're just like, I'm trying my best, I'm stuck. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be writing about. I added some stuff to your planning document just to help give you some guiding questions so that you know you're hitting on everything that a response like this would call for. Okay, so let's take a look at Serenity's work, and we'll also take a look at the kind of guiding questions and directions that I give you in the planning space of today's reassignment. Okay, so this is an example of just unacceptable work. The scholar here actually took the time to change their spacing to 1.5 to make it look like they wrote more than they did, which is just not going to fool anybody. And as you can see here, it's not long enough. You can't possibly cover a prompt like this with 1 short paragraph. Okay, so let's take a look at Serenity's. I'm going to pause at each different point in her writing and kind of cross-reference that with, let me find it. Here it is. If you look at your planning space, I provided more guidance for you as you write this to make sure that you're on the right track. Okay. All right. So the prompt was, What has enabled Buck to transform from the king of Judge Miller's estate to the head dog of the sled team? In order to receive full credit, evaluate London's craft and use of evidence from at least two of the sections of the text provided. And again, the text I provided was down here. I noticed in looking through Monica's response that she went ahead in the space I provided here and started highlighting the key evidence that she wanted to use from the segment of pre-transformation, so when he was still the king of the estate, and then she highlighted the evidence that she wanted to use later in her writing of his post-transformation, which is when he's in the north, working towards being that head dog that he becomes. So take a minute with me. Let's read through Serenities, and let's check that off with the guidance that I provided for you in your planning space, okay? So the first thing a proficient response is going to do to this assignment is they're going to name what enabled Buck to change. Serenity says the factor that enabled Buck to transform from the king of Judge Miller's estate to the head dog of the sled dog team is his ability to adapt to drastic changes he's had to face and ultimately learn from his experiences. Boom. So she named it right there. She's going to argue his ability to adapt and learn is what enables him to change. So there's her assertion. Now I know what she's proving for the rest of this. So what should you do next in a proficient response? Next, you should show how did London show that change? She says Buck's description changes throughout his journey from being a well-fed, pampered, free Southernland dog, transforming into a strong, muscled, cautious, beast-like, cunning sort of dog that has morphed to rise as a more fit to be an alpha. So that right there is how Serenity is breaking down how London showed the change. My push for Serenity right here would be to actually name that London did this, and possibly even put some of these terms in quotations, like strong and muscled. I know that he used that language, so if you want to show that it's London's descriptions of Buck change, like name that it's London that did it. Okay, so what's next? Next, we're going to focus on the first part of the novel, like when he was the king. Okay, and you're going to name right here the king, assertion, and context. The guiding question here is, what was Buck like at the beginning of the book? Serenity starts straight off with a quote. She says, quote, "But Buck was neither house dog nor kennel dog. The whole realm was his. He plunged into the swimming tank or went hunting with the judge's sons. He escorted Molly and Alice, the judge's daughters, on long twilight or early morning rambles. On wintry nights, he lay at the judge's feet before the roaring library fire. He carried the judge's grandsons on his back or rolled them in the grass and guarded their footsteps through wild adventures down to the fountain in the stable yard, and even beyond where the paddocks were and the berry patches." Scholars, this quote is way too long. What you should do at this point, as you jump into what he was like as a king, name what he was like and just summarize what his life was like. Okay, you don't have to give whole sections of the book like this. So she says, this explains that back home in the sun-kissed Santa Clara Valley, I like that embedded evidence, he ruled as king because there were no rules or dangerous decisions to be made. So far, what Serenity is, what if Serenity had this guide, I think she would have done this. Before you go into a description of Buck's life, first name what he was at first. Serenity's king assertion is that he was very pampered, and he had it easy. For context, she could have summarized all of those things that Buck did. You don't have to give quotes for it. You can summarize that he was the favorite, that he went swimming with the boys, that he could come in and out as he went. Maybe embed some evidence when you're summarizing that, but it's okay to put most of that in your own words. So now let's look at the analysis. For the king analysis, how did London show us what Buck was like at the beginning of the book? This explains that back home in the sun-kissed Santa Clara Valley, he ruled as king because there were no longer rules or dangerous decisions to be made. And most of all, he had no discipline in all those events. So he was very much used to not being told what to do or how to act, much like a king. So Serenity, that really was your assertion. So you could have put that earlier before your kind of description of what Buck's life was like. So now Serenity is getting into the analysis. How did London show us what Buck used to be like? She says this also highlights London's choice of character description because you can see how he chose to describe Buck as a dog who thought very highly of himself. He had a good, laid back life with no hardships or orders from anyone. Basically, he had an easy life. Boom. So far, she has, we've covered the king portion. She named what he was. He was pampered. He was kind of spoiled. She summarized what his life was like. Well, she gave a big long quote, but she should have kind of summarized what his life was like. And then she said she named how London showed us that through how he described Buck. Some specific terms that he uses would have been really strong here. Some specific descriptions that he did. In a writing like this, guys, most of your context can be in your own words. And when we get to the green section of how London showed it, you can fit quotes and keywords and key phrases into the green, into your analysis of London, in order to really prove how London showed us that. Now we're going to get into the head dog portion of our writing. The key question that you should be thinking about here is, what is Buck life? What is Buck like after getting used to sled dog life? So you got to name what he's like now and also give some context about what life is like now, just like you did for what life was like before. Serenity again just jumped straight into a quote that probably should have had some context to catch us up before we get thrown into a quote from later in the book. Quote, "You've learned your place and I know mine. Be a good dog and all will go well and the goose hang high. Be a bad dog and I'll will the stuffing out of you. Understand?" After Buck's kidnapping, he has a brutal awakening with the reality of his position in power. See, there's your context. That could have come before the quote, but you're catching us up to speed of how he changes and what he's like now. From all the beatings he's received because of past lifestyle, he was so comfortable with being left alone to rule over his own kingdom and live by his own rules and laws, but not the laws set up by the orders from his master, because in his mind, he ruled over both himself and his palace. So she's naming how he's changed. He no longer thinks that he's so powerful and he's the ruler. Now he has a master. London used this as a description on how Buck has changed in order to survive in the conditions of the wild. Because in the wild, you cannot always be in power or in charge, because you'll always have someone bigger and better than you to put you in your place and knock you off your high horse. So there's her kind of summary of how he's changed. She said the way that London showed us this was his descriptions. Again, some key phrases or words from later in the story of London describing Buck would have been really useful here. Okay. Here's another writing. I'm not going to break it down as much as I did Serenity's, but this one is Imani's. And you can see right here, just from the color coding that she did herself, you can see that she followed the steps. Here's her assertion of how he changed. And then she breaks down the beginning of the book, giving context. Then she breaks down how London showed us, how London showed us what he was like. Then she jumps into context of Buck getting kidnapped. Then she jumps into how Buck showed us him changing during that time. So it's always jumping between context and analysis, or context and your own claims. Use this planning guide to help you. You can answer your questions right below it. What has enabled Buck to change? Type out your response right below it, scholars, and then just copy and just cut it and paste it into the space provided at the bottom without my questions, and there's your essay. Okay, it's going to take some time, it's going to take some thought. Don't allow yourself to make excuses for yourself. Don't allow yourself to give yourself a pass. All of us can do it sometimes. We're faced with something challenging or something difficult, and that little voice in the back of our head starts making excuses, and we really run with that excuse. Like, we convince ourselves of whatever excuse it is, and when we know deep down that we're just making excuse and we need to step up. Okay, quick reminder of those who are not stepping up at this time: you will be very much inconvenienced when we do return to school in the fall, because we're going to give you these assignments to do as extra homework, or during club time and during team time. Okay, our lives are all disrupted right now, but that doesn't mean that things change, that the bar gets lowered, and that when it comes time to take your SATs, or to get into colleges of your choice, they're not going to lower the bar and say, well, hey, it's okay that you didn't quite meet the bar. We know that you had to do school from home for 3 months when you were in 7th grade. Okay, but the break that some of you are taking right now is setting you behind. And so we're going to do everything. Your teachers and even your teammates who are working hard are going to do everything we can to stop you from falling even further behind by convincing yourselves of those excuses that you're making. So you've got an extra day to do this, and then we're going to get back into the book tomorrow. If you go into office hours today, Ms. McKinney is just going to really direct you to this video and also to the guidance that I provided on the planning sheet. And again, if you did not get a 3 or a 4 out of 4, this assignment's coming back to you as a fresh sheet, and you're gonna get the opportunity to show what you can do. All right, so step up to the task. I know every single one of you can, and I'm really looking forward to it. See you tomorrow.